You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there's a lot to get to today. The Jets signing Logan Ryan, the John Shea interview, but I gotta start with the proposal that the MLB owners put forth to get baseball going again. Now, I'm working off Brendan Cuddy's article for NJ.com. I tweeted that yesterday at RealJacobValk. By the way, you should really follow me there because it serves as a great source of updates for this show. If there's something that I forget to mention, or if something happens late that you think I may talk about, but I'm already deep in the edit, I'm not going to talk about it, and I'll tweet about it there. For updates on this show, there's nothing better than to follow me on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Okay, on to Cuddy's article. I like his article because A, it's Yankee-centric, but B, it lays out all the big points of MLB's proposal. So, let's get into it now. We've heard that these leagues could stay in one city or just a couple states. Well, Major League Baseball's proposal is to have teams play in their home cities and even use them for spring trainings, so long as they're not putting anybody at increased risk for the coronavirus. There's no mention of if fans will be allowed in. Odds are they won't, though. Obviously, everyone would rather have teams play in their home cities. The biggest thing about having teams play in just one state is it's really unfair to the players that have built lives for themselves somewhere else. You can't be with your family for a long time. You can't see your house. You can't see your friends, which you probably couldn't do anyway now, but still, it's really tough to say to a player, hey, I know you built a life for yourself in this city where we promised you you'd play for 81 games. Well, now you're going to be in a bubble. That's tough. And if Major League Baseball can really get this done with teams playing in their home cities, that's really, really good, and that's a good sign for us getting past this. The big thing about putting everyone in a bubble was it limited the spread of the coronavirus. If we can have people traveling all across the country and no one gets sick, that's a really good harbinger of things to come. It means that we have a way to transport people safely. Now, it's going to be tough to coordinate this, especially with cities that have been harder hit by the coronavirus. No city in the nation has been hit harder than New York City. And there are 2 teams that play there, the Yankees and Mets. It's going to be really dicey to have games at Yankee Stadium and Citi Field when New York City still hasn't met all the benchmarks to reopen. I don't know where the Yankees and Mets would play if they couldn't play at Yankee Stadium or Citi Field. Maybe their spring training facilities. Someone brought up a good point. You still can't travel to Canada. So how are the Blue Jays going to play? I said put him in Buffalo. Put him in the minor league stadium there. He said no, put him in their spring training facility. You could do that. I like the idea of going to teams' home facilities as much as possible, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it 100%. The new schedule is for spring training to restart in early to mid-June, and for the regular season to start around July 4th. We'll have an 82-game schedule. We will have interleague play, but it'll be just the AL East going up against the NL East, the AL Central going up against the NL Central, and the AL West going up against the NL West. So that keeps the rivalries intact. You'll get Yankees-Mets, you'll get Cubs-White Sox, you'll get Angels-Dodgers. We get all the big rivalries that way. 82 games is a really tough pill to swallow, but the biggest knock for baseball for a long time has been that their schedule is so blasted long. 162 games. That's almost double an NHL schedule and an NBA schedule. Now Major League Baseball is going to be on an even footing with both those leagues. It's a tough pill to swallow because us baseball fans have gotten so used to the grind of a regular season, and, you know, you see the players build up the stats and the record chasing that comes with it, and now you're not going to see that. There will be no records broken this year. And if there are, you're going to have to put an asterisk on it. To cut the season by half? Yeah, we're going to have an asterisk. Just like there's an asterisk for the steroid era, there's an asterisk for this. You can even make the argument that there's going to be an asterisk on the World Series winner. See, with a shortened schedule, it's the younger teams that always rise to the top. You're going to see teams like the Blue Jays and White Sox, just off the top of my head, 2 teams with really talented young players that are going to be able to take advantage of this shortened schedule. And you'll see the veteran teams fade away. In the NHL, when they had their shortened schedule, young teams like the Islanders made the playoffs. Older teams didn't. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams respond to a shortened schedule. I'm personally okay with it as long as it means we can get baseball back. I mean, it's either that or you have a 100-game schedule and you're playing into December. No one wants that. You're going to be freezing your you-know-what's off. See, Major League Baseball gets it. You have to play during your allotted time. Leagues like the NHL and the NBA, they don't get it. They're trying to stretch their leagues deep into the summer. It doesn't work that way. You're going to affect other seasons. I don't understand why these leagues are so obsessed with affecting multiple seasons. Good job by Major League Baseball of trying to limit this to just one season. Instead of 10 teams getting into the playoffs, there will now be 14 teams getting in. This is just for this season, obviously. Doubling the wildcard spots in each league to 4. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I understand that Major League Baseball is trying to make up for lost revenue, and more playoffs is a great way to do it. But it just adds to the asterisk component of this season. If you have a team making the playoffs in that last wildcard spot, and that's the only year that wildcard spot is in existence, you're going to have a major asterisk on that playoff spot. Look, I understand that these leagues are hemorrhaging money. And they're going to try to make it up on the back end by having more playoff games so they can sell more ads at the playoff rate. Again, God only knows if they're going to have fans or not. One thing that I've thought about, and I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but one thing I've thought about is no fans for the regular season, but fans are allowed in for the playoffs. Because the playoffs are going to start in October. By then, we'll probably have everything under control. That would be really interesting to allow fans in for the first time for baseball games in the playoffs. I'd like that a lot. Obviously, this means that the season will stretch deep into November. I'm okay with that. That's not the end of the world. December was kind of the tipping point. I personally would have been okay with it, but there are a lot of people that wouldn't have been. I mean, keep in mind, New York gets really cold in December. As someone who has sat out at Yankee Stadium and Citi Field for hockey games, I will tell you, you freeze your you-know-what's off like nobody's business. I mean, look, if you have 40,000 people there, it limits the cold a little bit because you're sharing body warmth, but you still feel it. Trust me, you still feel it. The hot chocolate vendors will be making money hand over fist. This probably means that the season is going to end around Thanksgiving. I'm okay with that. I really have no problem with that. It still gives the players a little over 2 months to recover and get ready for spring training for next season. We'll have plenty of time to get a full off-season in. I don't really like the idea of expanded playoffs. I know why Major League Baseball is doing it. I can't begrudge it too much. It's just that we're going to have a major asterisk on those final playoff spots. This is the big one coming up. Owners want players to accept a certain percentage of their 2020 salaries instead of getting pay prorated by how many games are played. God only knows how much that percentage is going to be. Look, no one's making money right now. I said that yesterday. A lot of these owners may not have the money to pay these players without getting that sweet, sweet gate revenue. You think a team like the Oakland Athletics or the Tampa Bay Rays can afford to pay their players for too much longer? I don't think so. Even for the Yankees, it's tough. Garrett Cole's making $36 million this year. Or somewhere around there. That's not easy to pay when you don't have any income. Obviously, there are teams that probably have more money in the bank so they can live off their savings for longer, but it's tough. It's really, really tough. I really see this both ways. I understand wanting the players to accept a certain percentage because the owners want to try to make as much money as they can. That's their right. They're businessmen. But I understand the players wanting a prorated rate because that's probably the fairest way to do it. It's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds. That's the biggest sticking point towards getting a season going, besides, obviously, the unpredictability of the coronavirus. We're going to expand rosters again. Roster size was supposed to be 26 players this year. It's now going to be 30 with 20-man practice squads. My assumption is, and it's just an assumption, is that this means no minor league baseball. You're only going to be allowed to call players up from that taxi squad, and they're in essence going to serve as your minor league team. It's going to be really difficult for those guys to stay in shape without playing in actual games. I mean, you can probably have simulated games, but I don't know how that would work. You probably need to rent out like a college ballpark or something and say, hey, our guys need to play, they have to stay in shape. I honestly don't mind this, the expanded rosters. The biggest thing about starting a season this late is the player's fitness. There was an NBA trainer that said it's going to take their players a long time to get back into shape. Same thing for Major League Baseball. Same thing for the NHL. There's going to be a higher risk of injury this year than there's ever been before. So yeah, teams are going to need some extra roster spots. Think about it. Instead of a 40-man roster, we're now having a 50-man roster. It's going to be more like an NFL team. I really don't mind this. The players' health comes first. The union will love it because it means more players are getting MLB pay. It'll be interesting to see how the practice squad players get their pay rates determined. Are they getting minor league rates or MLB rates? I can't say I mind this. It's a logical conclusion. The universal DH is something that Rob Manfred has been pushing for a long time. In a perfect world, I would have it so the pitchers hit. I think it adds an element of strategy to the game that's lost with the DH. But I understand the argument for the DH. That's a losing battle. I'm not going to fight it. Okay? The die has been cast. The DH will be universal at some point down the line. As it should be. It should be universal one way or the other. We shouldn't have the game being played one way in one league and another way in the other league. This is also a way to reduce strain on the pitchers. Don't have them focus on hitting, have them focus on pitching. Helps lessen their injury risk. I really like it. I think that's a logical conclusion. All in all, God only knows if this is going to happen or not. I know that revenue sharing is another big element of this. God only knows how that's going to end up. Hopefully both parties can act civilly, and we can get some baseball going this year. I mean, it's May 12th. Alright, I want baseball. I want hockey, I want basketball, but more than anything, I want baseball. Both my hockey and basketball teams would be out of it right now. I want to see the Yankees. Last weekend, the Yankees were set to play the Red Sox. You have no idea how tough that was for me. Best rivalry in sports. And it didn't happen. Okay, now I'm sad thinking about how I didn't see Yankees Red Sox over the weekend. I'm gonna bring some happy back to this show by talking about the Jets signing Logan Ryan! Yeah! Oh, perfect move. Thank you, Joe Douglas. Yesterday, I called out Joe Caporoso. He didn't respond. The invitation is still open. And my main thing was that this team needed defense more than offense. They beefed up the offense. Now it's time to beef up the defense. Well, Joe Douglas agreed with me. That's a pretty good endorsement. I think it's safe to say that I win. Oh, such a great move to bring in Logan Ryan. Best cornerback available. The Jets had probably the worst cornerback group in the NFL. Here's what their depth chart looked like. Pierre Desir, Bless Austin, Brian Poole, Bryce Hall, Quincy Wilson, and Arthur Mollett. You can also throw in some other schmageggies like Nate Hairston, who played a lot last year. I hope he gets cut. He was terrible for the Jets. Bennett Jackson, Anthony Chaffee, Lamar Jackson, Shaheem Carter, Javelin Guidry. It doesn't matter. Because the Jets added a quality NFL cornerback. And that's what Logan Ryan is. He's a quality player. He's never had a Pro Football Focus grade worse than 62.3. And that was in an injury-shortened 2014 season. His sophomore season. Now last year, he had his worst grade since then. 63.1 overall grade. But this guy is a quality player. Alright, 63.1 is still good. And there was no doubting that Logan Ryan was the best cornerback available. And probably the third best free agent available. Clowney, Warford, Ryan. Now you take a look at that Jets corner group. Desir, Austin, Poole, Ryan, Hall, Wilson, Mollett. Look, it's still not great. It's not where I'd like it to be in a perfect world, but it's a lot better than it was 24 hours ago. Logan Ryan makes this defense a lot better. Now, if you want to tell me that's a bad thing because Logan Ryan isn't a great corner, I'm with you there. He's not a great corner. But he's a good corner. And in the middle of May, that's all you're going to get. It's very rare that you find a Jadeveon Clowney who's still sitting out there waiting to be signed. It's very rare that a Larry Warford gets cut. And let me tell you, there are a lot of teams that could use Larry Warford. Not just the Jets. What a stupid decision by the Saints. Hell, the Jets can sign all three of those guys. Ryan, Warford, and Clowney. Manish Mehta of the Daily News here in New York was the first one to put out this report. He didn't say that the Jets signed Logan Ryan, though. That is important. He said that the Jets believe they'll sign him. But I'm operating under the assumption that they will sign him. If they don't, I will be very, very upset. One thing that I didn't realize, though, is that Jets ownership has been stingy with the money. And that's why the Jets didn't sign anyone to big contracts. This wasn't a Joe Douglas move. This was an ownership move. Now, I don't know how true that is. Manish Mehta isn't the best Jets reporter. He's not terrible, but he's not at the level of a Rich Cimini or a guy like that. Everything I've heard is that this was Joe Douglas's plan to not spend money. I didn't hear anything about ownership. If it's true that Jets ownership was really the driving force behind not signing anyone to big contracts, I'm sorry for criticizing you, Mr. Douglas. At the end of the day, you're at the mercy of your owner if you're a GM. If he says to you as the GM, you can only spend X amount, I don't care what the salary cap is, you can only spend X amount, that's your limit. It's not the salary cap. But again, I don't know how true the notion is that Chris Johnson didn't okay a big payroll this year. According to overthecap.com, the Jets have just under $15 million in cap space. Now, God only knows how much the Ryan contract is going to be worth, but the Jets can clear up some space. They're going to save $11 million by cutting Trumaine Johnson after June 1st. They can save over $7 million by cutting Brian Winters. And they can save over $2 million by cutting Nate Hairston. That should give them enough room to sign Larry Warford and possibly Jadeveon Clowney. It is possible that Joe Douglas could say to Clowney, look, sign with us on a discounted rate. If you play well, I promise you you're going to get a huge contract when we have the money to give it to you. Larry Warford is probably going to sign for a cheaper rate than people think he is. Usually, players that get cut this late don't sign exorbitant contracts. Now, granted, the players that get cut this time of year aren't at the caliber of Larry Warford, but still, a lot of teams don't have the money to bring in a big free agent at a big contract. I mean, the Browns do. The Browns have over $38 million in cap space. And they could use a guy like Larry Warford. He's better than Wyatt Teller. There's no question about that. Quite frankly, I don't even think the Jets need Warford that much. If they lose out on Warford, it's not the end of the world. They still have a solid O-line of Becton, Lewis, McGovern, Van Roten, and Fant. And they can cut Winters, and cut Johnson, and cut Hairston, and clear up the money to sign Jadeveon Clowney. I gotta tell you, that's the makings of a good team. That's the makings of a team that will hover around 500. And in a league with expanded playoffs, there's nothing stopping an 8-8 team or a 9-7 team from making the playoffs. It was funny, a friend of mine and I were going through the Jets' schedule and saying which games they'd lose and which games they'd win. I was really pessimistic about them 24 hours ago. I was only giving them like 6 wins. Now, 6 wins is the bare minimum of what they'll get. It is very possible that they could end up with 7 wins or 8 wins or 9 wins. If they bring in Clowney and or Warford in addition to Ryan, yeah. They finished 7-9 last year. This team right now is probably better than last year's team. The O-line is better. The secondary is better. The edge rushers, assuming they bring in Clowney, will be infinitely better. This is a team that could fight for a playoff spot. All in all, I'm really sorry for doubting you, Joe Douglas. This was a great move to bring in Logan Ryan. You don't have to bring in Larry Warford. If you do, fine, but don't do it at the expense of bringing in Jadeveon Clowney. Clowney comes first. You've proven that you agree with me in putting defense over offense right now. You beefed up the offense earlier. Now it's time to beef up the defense, which you agree with. You brought in Ryan. Fantastic move. Now, finish it by bringing in Jadeveon Clowney. Give him the contract he wants. If ownership is playing hardball with you, I don't care what you have to do to get Chris Johnson to realize that this guy is worth a big commitment, but do it. And with Ryan and Clowney on the Jets roster, this is a team that could go 9-7 and could fight for a playoff spot. Alright, here's my interview with John Shea. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I am fortunate enough to be talking to John Shea, one of the most respected writers in all of baseball. He's also the co-author of Willie Mays' book, 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. John, how are you?
Well, great, Jacob. Thanks for having me on.
No, my pleasure. This is really a treat to get to talk to someone as knowledgeable as you about someone as iconic as Willie Mays. So,
iconic's a good word. I'm pinching myself thinking about the access he gave me and allowing me to tell all these wonderful stories about him and his life and his career.
Now, before we get into Mays, you have had a very distinguished career, and even though I'm in New York, I like to keep my finger on the pulse of all of baseball. Was Mays your favorite player growing up? Like, how cool was it to get to talk to him?
Yeah, and I caught the late 60s, early 70s, the final few years of his career. And 71, that was a big one for me. He was 40, right, and the Giants won the division. And at age 40, he led the National League in on-base percentage and walks and hit 18 home runs and stole 23 bases in 26 attempts. He was still very good at age 40. And so, yeah, I grew up idolizing him, and to think that one day I would actually meet him and write about him in the newspaper, and then, my goodness, write a book with him? Come on.
Yeah, I could just imagine myself doing that with Aaron Judge 30 years from now. So
California's Aaron, yeah.
Yeah. So, how did Mays get the nickname the Say Hey Kid?
Well, when he was coming up, he didn't know everybody's name. He spent just a year in the minors. He graduated from high school in May of 1950, and in May of 1951, he's the center fielder for the New York Giants at the Polo Grounds. And that's hard to believe. And all of a sudden, he spent his high school days in the Negro Leagues, and he knew everybody from that team. He knew all about the history of because that was like his hometown team. He's from Fairfield, which is a neighboring community. So then he gets to the New York Giants, and he doesn't know who these guys are. All these great players like Alvin Dark or Eddie Stanky. He knows Monty Irvin because Monty Irvin took him under his wing, the great Negro League player who was a teammate and played left field. for the Giants that year, and he took him under his wing, and they were actually roommates. But for the most part, it was kind of live and learn thing. So he'd pretty much just say hey to guys, He'd just say hey to him and just say hey to the other guy. And the sports writer penned the nickname "Say Hey Kid" because it fit so perfectly, because he was a kid and still is a kid, and that joyful exuberance and playing the game with style and panache, and every reason why we played the game as kids, he played the game at the highest level in the same manner.
All right, so you brought up the fact that it was out of the frying pan into the fire for Mays, 20 years old, and he's playing 120 games for the Giants. Unreal, and they go on this magical run late in the season to tie the Dodgers, force the 3-game playoff to decide who's going to eventually lose to the Yankees in the 51 World Series. What did Mays tell you about being on deck for the shot heard around the world?
He said he was nervous. He said,
really?
Yeah. I mean, here's a guy who in high school played in the Negro Leagues and broke the color barrier not only for his minor league team, the Trenton Giants, but broke the color barrier in that whole league that he played in once out of the Negro Leagues. So imagine that, one of all nothing but in the Negro Leagues, and then going over to the minor leagues. It's just a cultural shock that I can't imagine. And then he goes to the Polo Grounds, and I mean it's just unbelievable how he maneuvered and managed himself in those early years, but he was a good player, maybe not a great player. He hit in the 260s. He was still Rookie of the Year. He hit some home runs and was exceptional defensively, but he struggled early on. And Leo DeRocher said, "Listen, you're not here to hit. You're here to defend." And he was down on himself after a 0 for 12 and a 1 for 25 start with the Giants. But after Leo told him that, he settled down and started to go off at the plate. But he was nervous there, but he said that kind of helped him later in life not to be nervous in the big moment, because he came through so many times in his career. And as he says in the book, he says, you don't even see me in the pictures. I was on deck, but I was the last guy to the plate to congratulate him because I just had no idea what was going on. I'm a 20-year-old kid, and I just couldn't imagine the importance and impact of the moment. And all these years later, he actually does. But he said that moment of being scared helped him later in life.
And it's kind of funny. You mentioned the 1 for 25 start to his career. The one hit he got was a home run off of Warren Spahn, if you could believe it. This 20-year-old kid hits a home run off Warren Spahn. How about that?
And it wasn't just a home run. It was one of the longest home runs you'd see at the Polo Grounds, way over the left field wall, atop the roof. And, for some reason he had Spahn's number. Warren Spahn and Juan Marichal had that 16-inning game at Candlestick years later, 0-0 in the 16th until Mays walks it off with a home run into the wind at Candlestick Park. So he hit more home runs against Warren Spahn than any other pitcher. And when Willie Mays got to speak at the Hall of Fame at his induction, Warren Spahn was in the audience, and he said, who I like to thank the most? See that bald-headed guy over there, Warren Spahn. Thank you very much.
That's good. I like that. So we'll fast forward a little bit to 1954. Can you lay out that season for Mays?
That was a season of a lifetime. He was in the military for 2 years. He's Rookie of the Year in 51. In May of 52, he's called in, with the Korean War, many baseball players, Don Newcomb, Johnny Antonelli, Whitey Ford, they were all, these aren't the types like Ted Williams or Jerry Coleman who actually fought and in battle. These are ball players they summoned and brought to, into the military, into the Army in particular, to improve or help morale of the troops. They were there to entertain the troops. And how? They were there to play baseball. So they had all these baseball leagues. And Antonelli really mapped it out for me splendidly when he said, he explained a whole day in the life of, an Army soldier who was actually also a baseball player. And Mays did that for 2 years. It's where he developed the basket catch, and he came out in '54 with the basket catch. And Leo Durocher said, "Hey, you're going to drop one. I'm going to fine you $50." And Willie dropped two in his life. Once in '55, Ernie Banks at the Polo Grounds, and once 10 years later, Don Clendenin in Pittsburgh. And those are the only two ones he remembers dropping. So it's a pretty good track record for the basket catch. But '54, he did everything. And this is the time in the three boroughs when you had three great teams and three great center fielders. You had Duke Snider, and you had Mickey Mantle, and you had Willie Mays. Willie, Mickey, or the Duke, right? And then they made the song Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. But that was the big argument. And in those 4 years, '54.
I'm partial to Mantle for whatever it's worth. I'm partial to Mantle for whatever it's worth.
Oh, for sure. Willie says that Mantle outslugged him and could outrun him. And he says, Mays said, I could hit the ball 2 or 3 rows into the bleachers. Mickey hit it over the bleachers.
Well, look, the thing is, Snider really shouldn't be in that. As great as Snider was, he had a great career. He wasn't as dominant as Mays or Mantle. Mantle was probably more dominant than Mays, but Mays just didn't have the injury history that Mantle did. So Mays had the better career, but Mantle was more dominant. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would disagree with what you said about Duke Snider, because '54, '55, '56, '57, you could look it up. He was no less a hitter than Mays or Mantle. I mean, he 40 bombs, 100 RBIs, helped the Dodgers win it all in '55, and was always among the top in the MVP race. And I say '54, '55, '56, '57 because that's the first year Mays is out of the military, and the last year, '57, that the Dodgers and Giants are in New York before they hit the West Coast. So those 4 years, it was a legitimate argument and debate. And the folks from Brooklyn had a good case. Obviously, you're right. Mays had better longevity, and when the Dodgers came to L.A., Duke wasn't nearly the hitter that he was in Brooklyn. And Mickey, obviously, with the drinking and the injuries, didn't have a long career, and it probably affected his life. And Mays and Mantle really close, and Willie saying both great things about Duke and Mickey. But you're right. Over the course of the career, it was Mays, Mickey, and Duke. But those 4 years, man, that was a terrific time in the boroughs.
No question about that. What can you tell us about the catch?
Wow. 6.5 seconds of amazing athleticism in which the ball is hit off the bat of Vic Wirtz all the way until the time Willie Mays lets go of the ball. 6.5 seconds that will never be duplicated again. Why? Because it was 482 feet, 83 feet to dead center at the Polo Grounds. It was like 460 and then another 25 in between this recessed area. And that was all fair play. And Mays caught the ball and got to the warning track before he made the throw. So imagine how far that ball,
it's a home run in any other park.
Well, 420 is the deepest center field in the majors today, and that's Detroit, 420. So you had another 30, 40 feet. That's where Mays was. So it was funny. They moved to Seal Stadium in San Francisco. Bill Rigney was the manager, and it was a smaller park, obviously. But so too many times Willie Mays came back to the dugout and said, "Sorry, Skip, I would have caught that, but there was no more room to run."
He probably would have.
Yeah, a fly ball to center field, it's in Mays' grasp. But if there was a wall there, there's so much he can do.
Right. Talking to John Shea, the co-author of Willie Mays' book, 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. So I've always been curious about this. Was Mays upset when the Giants moved from New York to San Francisco?
It's funny. It's funny you asked that question. I was at his house the other day. You mind if I name drop? I was at Willie Mays' house the other day.
Good for you.
And I was actually talking to him about that.
That's unreal.
Like regrets or things that you wish didn't happen. And one of his regrets is not experiencing the college atmosphere, not going to college. He just didn't have that opportunity. Baseball was his third sport. He was a great quarterback in high school, and a shooting guard on the basketball team. And they didn't even have a high school baseball team at his high school. Kids just kind of played in local leagues. Well, he played for the Birmingham Black Barons instead, so he didn't need a high school team. So he said, you know what? I knew it took me a year to get to know San Francisco, and by then I knew everything about New York. I knew where to go to eat, knew where the music, and, he lived not far from the Polo Grounds. You saw those famous pictures of him playing stickball with the kids in Harlem. So it took some adjustments, but more than that, he wasn't accepted right away in San Francisco because it was Joe DiMaggio's town. Because Joe DiMaggio was raised in San Francisco. He played at Seal Stadium for the San Francisco Seals in the old Pacific Coast League. And here comes Willie Mays all those years later when, DiMaggio's the great Yankee and went on to stardom in New York. And then Willie shows up playing Joe's position in Joe's stadium in Joe's town, and they were not warm to him right away. Why root for the New Yorker? Joe's our guy. We'll take McCovey and Cepeda and all these young, fresh kids who started in San Francisco. So it's unbelievable to think back, when the Giants ballpark is at 24 Willie Mays Plaza, and there's a big statue of Willie Mays there, that at one time San Franciscans were slow to accept the great Mays, who was 26, 27 at the peak of his game.
Did DiMaggio and Mays get along?
Well, they did. Mays idolized DiMaggio as a kid. Why? Because DiMaggio could do all, everything. He could hit for power, throw, run, and field. And that's what Mays' goal was, to be good at all five tools. And
he was.
And Mays never regretted that Joe, who won an award as the greatest living ball player, used that every time he was announced at Yankee Stadium or a banquet or anything else. I must be announced as Joe DiMaggio, the greatest living ball player. Mays was alive. Aaron was alive. Mantle was alive. All these greats were alive. But that's the billing that, the great Joe D got, all the championships and the commercials and Marilyn Monroe. Willie never regretted that or had a bad word to say about that. So while many people thought Willie was the greatest living ball player, in fact, maybe the greatest ball player of all time, that said a lot.
Yeah, look, I got to tell you, there's no bigger Yankee fan than me, born and raised on Long Island. I've been to over 200 Yankee games. Even I would put Willie Mays over Joe DiMaggio. As great as DiMaggio was, I'm not trying to diminish his legacy. As great as DiMaggio was, Mays was better. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
The durability, the longevity, Roger Angel, the great writer, in his late 90s now, speaks and writes like he did when he was 40. And he had this great comment in the book. This is a man who saw Babe Ruth in his prime, by the way, and was great when comparing DiMaggio with Mays, because he said DiMaggio never dived, he never lunged, but then here comes Willie, just like diving out of his uniform and lunging and making this great play. And he said DiMaggio never, and this is Roger Angel, who, and it means a lot because it's Roger Angel. He said, DiMaggio never made you say, wow. It was all calculated. You kind of knew what he did. But with Mays, you never knew what he was going to do. With the basket catches, Willie telling me, I tried to make the easy plays look hard, the hard plays look easy. He said, with Mays, like every time the ball went up in the air, oftentimes he would just say, wow. And I said, that says a lot. Just a great comparison by somebody who saw them both.
Yeah, no question about that. So would you be able to describe Mays' 4-home run game?
It was the greatest offensive performance of Willie Mays' career, and it nearly didn't happen because he was supposed to sit out that day. Why? Because he and Willie McCovey, the night before in Milwaukee, shared a plate of ribs, and Mays was up sick all night.
Ooh.
And Willie Mays, by the way, didn't miss games. Over a 13-year stretch, he played in 150 games every season, 13 straight years. And that's something that'll never be broken. That's a record that won't go away, with all the matchups and guys taking a day or two off every week. And most of that streak, by the way, during the 154-game season, not during the 162-game season. 150 games. So he played every day. He played every game. All-Star games, he wanted to go all 9. Spring training, managers would want to play him because they valued winning more in spring training back then. It's just crazy to look back at the longevity of Mays. I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, no question about that. I mean, the guy just never got hurt until late in his career. We'll get into that a little later, but I'd love to know what you can tell us about Mays' 1962 season, if you can.
Well, he hit a home run on the final scheduled day of the season that beat the Houston Colt 45s in the 8th inning, broke a tie, and the Giants needed the Dodgers to lose later that day to St. Louis, and the Dodgers did lose 1-0. So that created a 162-game tie and a best-of-3 series. And in the opener, Mays homers twice, once off Koufax. Dodgers win the second game. Giants win the third game. Mays, a key single during the winning rally late in the game. And then they go into the World Series, and they play the New York Yankees. Game 7, it's a 1-0 score. This is Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and it had rained for many days, and the series was delayed. The outfield was soggy. So there are 2 outs in the 9th, and Matty Alou is on first, and Willie Mays is at the plate. And Mays doubles down the right field line, and Matty Alou goes to third. And McCovey comes up and hits the wickedest line drive you'd ever see, but right to the second baseman, Bobby Richardson. So all these years later, Willie says, "I wish I were the runner." I said, "What do you mean? I wish you?" Said, "I wish I was running. I wish I was the guy running instead of hitting that double down the right field line, because I would have gone right through Herman Franks' stop sign at third base and tested the Yankees defense." I said, "What? With the game on the line, with the series on the line?" He says, "Absolutely." And Roger Maris is in right field. It's a soggy outfield, so the ball doesn't go all the way to the wall. And Maris, who's a real good defensive outfielder, throws to Richardson at second base. Perfect cut. Richardson steps and throws. One hopper, little high to Elston Howard at the plate. And Mays said, this is back in the day when you can wipe out the catcher. And Mays and everybody did, because that was their job and catchers expected it. And Mays said, I would have just taken my chances and gone off after Elston. Well, I asked Bobby Richardson for the book. I said, well, what do you think of that? I mean, obviously Matty Alou weighed 125 pounds, right? He wasn't going to knock over anybody, and he didn't have Mays' speed. But Bobby Richardson tells me for the book, he says, well, if Willie Mays tried to score, there's a good chance he would have. So imagine
really?
That. Yeah. A Yankee of all people, the great Bobby Richardson, says that Mays would have scored, had a good chance to score if he actually were the runner. So there's a lot of things that went on in the final moments of the 1962 World Series that were just fascinating.
It's kind of funny when we think about Mays' postseason career. There are some people, not me, some people think that it was really underwhelming. He only won one World Series. He was this great player and could never get over the hump. And even in 54, he wasn't their best player. Dusty Rhodes was. What would you say to people that minimize his postseason career? Because I think it's ludicrous.
Well, I mean, there's an argument. I've covered Barry Bonds in San Francisco, and he didn't. He was awful in the postseasons all the way up until 2002.
Right.
When the Giants and Angels were in the World Series, and everybody expected Bonds to be the MVP because the Giants had a big lead in Game 6 to close out the series, and then the bullpen gave it up, and then they lose Game 7. So Bonds doesn't get his MVP, and that would have been like a crowning moment for a guy who just didn't do well in the postseason. But Bonds never had the moment that Mays did in Game 1 of the 54 series with the catch of the Vic Wertz blast. And this was against the mighty Cleveland Indians, who won 111 games out of 154, and they were favored to sweep. And what did the Giants do? Well, they swept. And Mays' catch preserved an 8-8 or eighth inning tie, 2-2 score. And you're right, Dusty Rhodes hit a home run. That Vic Wertz thing went about 460, and And the game-winning home run by Dusty Rhodes went about 260. That's how goofy the Polo Grounds were back in the day. But
Unreal.
yeah, that's fair. But then again, Mays had this great best-of-3 series against the Dodgers in '62, which officially wasn't the postseason because they counted those 3 games as regular season games. So both those teams actually played 165 games that year. But his defense and base running, aren't measured in his batting average, right? So, every pitcher you would ever ask who performed in those postseasons would want nobody else but Mays, patrolling the center field, whether it's Polo Grounds or Candlestick Park or on the road. So, they did invent an award. They renamed the World Series MVP award to the Willie Mays World Series MVP award.
I thought that was really nice.
The last 3 years. So, it's a good argument, but his World Series performances were so infrequent. It was like 51 to 54, and then he had to wait all the way to 62, and then he got to the Mets at an older age, and now he's 42 in 73. So it wasn't like Mantle in the postseason every year, or DiMaggio or Yogi or all those Yankees.
Talking to John Shea, the co-author of Willie Mays' book, 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. So can you lay out Mays' 1965 season, arguably his best season?
Well, that was his second MVP. He won it in '54 and won another game, another MVP in '65. You say that's his best season. So Bill James, the godfather of analytics and kind of a pioneer in the way in the
sabermetrics,
advanced statistics, and the way we value players now and look at games. It's a whole different world. He had a quote in the book: Willie Mays' best season is every year. Just pick one. They're all great. And here's a guy who values and analyzes and crunches numbers like nobody else. And it's a good point because we have WAR now, wins above replacement, and the all new and all encompassing statistic. And you have a 10 WAR season, 10 wins in a season. That's epic stuff. That's MVP stuff. It's only been accomplished like 9 or 10 times since 2000. Bonds had 3 10-WAR seasons. Trout had 3 10-WAR seasons. And like 3 or 4 other guys had one of those since 2000. Well, Willie Mays, over a 7-year stretch, averaged a 10-WAR season every year. And, I mean, that just goes to suggest that you could take 65, but you'd also look at 54. So Willie Mays was an MVP in 54. He thought his season in 55 was even better. So all these advanced number guys like Bill James and Eno Saris and Rob Nyer and Tom Tango, they crunched a lot of the numbers for me in one chapter. And instead of the 2 MVPs, I walk away from conversations with these guys and doing the math with them. He could have had, in today's thinking, between 8 and 11 MVPs based on his WAR and all these advanced stats and the numbers they value today.
Hey, look, he was that dominant. And it's funny, I was looking at his 62 season, and I saw he placed second in MVP voting. So I clicked on the Baseball Reference link and saw who got first place. Maury Wills won 1962 NL MVP. I understand. Yeah, I understand that he had 104 steals that year. Modern day record at the time. It's been broken since, but that's an impressive season. How on God's earth did Willie Mays not win MVP that year?
Well, even with the old school way of voting, if you led your team to the pennant, you probably had a good chance if you're running even with another candidate. And the Giants did win the pennant, and Mays did lead them to the pennant. And Maury Wills had 104 steals, first time in history. But what did it get him? Mays and Wills actually scored the exact same number of runs. Willie had like 100 RBIs more than Maury. The home runs, I mean, come on. Maury didn't hit a home run. But he got on base, he stole, and then he scored. That it's fine, it's great. But that would never happen today. I mean, when Miguel Cabrera won an MVP for the Triple Crown, even though he didn't have the best overall season. Mike Trout did. There was chaos and controversy, and yeah, I mean that's nothing like it was in 1962. The Dodgers get an MVP guy, and he stole 104 bags, but that was it. His other numbers didn't measure up to Willie's, and Willie had like a 10 WAR that year, and Maury's WAR was like 5 or 6. So that would never happen today. But it's interesting how things have developed and how we value players a little bit differently than we used to. The backs of their baseball cards were pretty much all we valued. Well, there's home runs, there's RBIs, there's runs scored, and there's strikeouts and walks, and that was it. Now we go a little deeper.
Yeah, and that's a good thing because Maury Wills never should have won that MVP. It should have been Mays's all the way. So, we'll fast forward a little bit. Why did the Giants trade Mays to the Mets?
Well, Horace Stoneham was the owner at the time. Horace and the O'Malley family, they moved from New York to the West Coast. And who got the better of that deal? Dodger Stadium versus Candlestick Park?
I'll take Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, Peter O'Malley, or Walter O'Malley, Peter's dad, actually got his way. He had all this property in the Southland, and he just killed it with attendance. And Horace Stoneham picks the worst place on earth to have a ballpark, right off the San Francisco Bay, where the wind is at its worst. And so anyway, they don't draw at Candlestick like they draw at Dodger Stadium. So Horace Stoneham didn't have the funds, and Willie Mays was one of the highest paid players in baseball, making all of $165,000. And Horace Stoneham, the owner, could really not afford that anymore. But Joan Payson, who was majority owner of the New York Mets and had a minority share in the New York Giants, and then got rid of it when the Giants moved west, absolutely loved Mays, and he always talked about having Willie on her team. And well, when in May of 1972, it actually happened. The great Mays, at the end of his career, is traded to New York, where he started it all with the expansion Mets. And Joan Payson got her player, and Willie Mays went back home to his baseball roots. And next thing you know, they're in the World Series. But yeah, Charlie Williams, a pitcher that many people might not have heard of, and cash to the Giants for Willie Mays, just so that Stoneham didn't have to pay Willie anymore.
Unreal. That's really it's unreal that you would trade Willie Mays because you didn't want to pay him. And of all the people on earth to pay, wouldn't you want to pay Willie Mays?
Yeah, and they by then Marichal was winding up his career. The Giants just made awful trades. Forget Mays. They traded Orlando Cepeda for Ray Sadecki. The next year, Cepeda goes to St. Louis, wins the MVP, and the Cardinals win the World Series. Well, then they trade Gaylord Perry, and Perry goes on to win 2 Cy Young awards. They trade George Foster for Frank Duffy, and Foster goes on to win an MVP with the Reds and the Big Red Machine.
They trade Bobby Bonds, a fan favorite.
They trade Bobby Bonds for Bobby Mercer, who lasted all of 1 year in San Francisco. And Mercer compared to the mantle, just like Bobby Bonds was compared to Mays. Different pressures in different cities, and Bobby kept hitting. He was a great hitter, but he, the next 6 or 7 years he played for 6 or 7 teams. Wasn't able to keep his luggage around any one city at any time. So yeah, it was tough to trade the great Willie Mays. I was a kid. I didn't appreciate it, but nobody else did. And what they got, they were awful pretty much all the way until the late 70s, and then 82. Those were the next 2 years they contended, but they didn't get anywhere. They didn't get to the postseason. So from 71 to 87, they were not in the playoffs. And then Will Clark and those guys come along and lead the charge in 87. So that 16 years without any postseason for the Giants. The curse of Willie Mays. Or the curse of Horace Stoneham, I should say.
Yeah? I like that. So, would you be able to describe the incredibly stupid reason that Mays was forced to leave baseball after he retired?
Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner at the time, Willie Mays, there's no pension plan, by the way. There's no pension for any of these guys. Willie topped out at 165 and retired, and there was nothing else to do. That's why people became shoe salesmen, truckers, any odd job they would get. You're retired as a baseball player. Okay, what now? It's not like coming off $100 million contract and I don't have to do anything the rest of my life. All these people went back in the field and worked.
Did he have endorsements?
Yeah, but not like DiMaggio or Mickey. He
Okay.
didn't have the Yankee pinstripes, so it was a little different. And need I say, skin color at the time.
Sure.
Bowie Kuhn. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're 100% right. That race probably played a factor in it, unfortunately.
And Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner at the time, didn't appreciate that Willie Mays worked for Bally's, which was a casino, even though Willie was a PR guy who played golf with clients and signed autographs and did shows and pretty much represented the casino. The contract said you couldn't bet there, you couldn't gamble, and there was no gambling. The whole thing with baseball, Shoeless Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, that's different. They actually bet on games while in uniform. And, Willie said he never did anyway. It wasn't his thing. He just represented because he was making $50,000 a year doing that, So it was something that he wanted to do in long term, but the commissioner of baseball threw him out of the game, suspended him. And a couple of years later, did the same thing with Mickey Mantle, who worked at another casino. And luckily, in 1984, after overseeing the Olympics in L.A., Peter Ueberroth became commissioner, and one of the first things he did was bring Willie and Mickey back in the game. It didn't really help Bowie Kuhn's legacy that he threw those two guys out, and it sure helped Ueberroth that he brought them back in.
Yeah,
so the two greatest players going couldn't even go to spring training and put on a uniform and sign autographs because they were thrown out of the game by Bowie Kuhn.
Yeah, as bad as a commissioner as Ueberroth was, and Lord knows he had his issues of collusion, excuse me, that may be the smartest thing that Peter Ueberroth ever did, reinstating Mays and Mantle. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that, I spoke with him about the book, and he's darn proud that he did that. And the one thing he wanted to make sure that the announcement was epic, and that he had Sports Illustrated come in, and those three were on the cover. Welcome back was the headline. Ueberroth with his arms over the shoulders of Mays and Mantle. He wanted as much publicity with that announcement as Mays and Mantle got with the announcements that they were banned from baseball.
Good. I like hearing that. That's a classy move by Ueberroth.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to John Shea, the co-author of Willie Mays' book, 24, Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. And, John, I'll get you out on this. Where do you rank Mays personally on your list of the best MLB players ever?
Well, number one.
Okay.
I mean,
I can't say I disagree with you too much.
Well, there's only one other choice, and that's Babe Ruth. Joe Posnowski did a big top 100 for The Athletic in recent weeks, and I woke up one day and I followed it all the way through, and there was Babe Ruth number 2, and I was, whoa, that's amazing. So that means tomorrow when I wake up, Mays will be number 1. That's pretty cool, and I believe in that for 2 reasons. They said they said Babe Ruth, hit more home runs than other teams. That's how much he dominated the game. They also said, well, Babe Ruth was a pitcher and Willie Mays wasn't. Well, to that I would say, when the Giants signed Mays out of Birmingham, there were scouts who said, and I saw these clippings in the local Birmingham papers, that Mays' future would be as a pitcher because he had such a good arm, and we saw it later in center field. And lo and behold, he became the best center fielder ever. But if he pitched, who's to say he wouldn't have been as good as the Babe, who was a very good pitcher early in his career. Number 2 is Babe never played against any minorities. And he played against inferior competition. He never played against Satchel Paige. He never opposed Oscar Charleston or any of these wonderful ball players from the Negro Leagues. Where Mays came along in '51, 4 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color line, so all of Willie's career, he played with and against African Americans. He played with and against Latinos, and so we don't want to compare errors. That's very hard to do, but Mays certainly, you could say, was better than Ruth if you're looking at the five tools, because Babe couldn't run the bases like Willie. He couldn't defend like Willie. He couldn't throw in the outfield like Willie. Babe had a better lifetime batting average. He had more home runs, but maybe he wouldn't have if Willie didn't spend those 2 years in the military. When he came out, he hit 92 his first 2 years. Well, conservatively, if you think, maybe he would have hit 60 if he didn't go in the military. Well, he finished with 660, and another 60 would have put him past Babe Ruth.
All right, John, I can't say I disagree with you too much. Thank you for your time.
Oh, this was wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
All right, that was John Shea. He's the co-author of Willie Mays' book, 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Say Hey Kid. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. I gotta say, it was kind of funny about that interview. He disagreed with me on a couple points. I understand that it was Willie Mickey or the Duke, but the simple fact is, when you look at their career stats, Duke Snider falls woefully short of Mays and Mantle. And look, Snider had years where he was better than Mantle, and maybe even Mays. But when you look at their career totals, Snider doesn't come close to him. That was my point. And the thing about Mays not having a great postseason career, only one World Series win in 1954, and he gets World Series MVP named after him, Shea understood that criticism. That's kind of interesting. I respect his honesty. I really, really do. He's a really nice man, though. Has had a very successful career. Very, very nice guy. Tomorrow, you're probably going to get the trifecta, assuming there's no other big news. Maybe the Jets will sign Jadeveon Clowney. Let's do it. Let's go. Maybe there will be another proposal for return to play for another league. I don't know what the future holds. What I do know is that I am Jacob Valk saying that Dick Allen's weakness wasn't the high fastball, it was the fast high ball.